world is becoming more unglued by the day. Local consequences are now showing up. We are seeing sky-high gas prices, higher food prices, shortages, and more. How should you respond? Go to redpills.tv/patriot. That's redpills.tv/patriot. And secure your long-term emergency food storage from My Patriot Supply. My Patriot Supply is by far the largest preparedness company in America. They're in stock and shipping quickly in unmarked boxes to your door. Their emergency food supplies last up to 25 years in storage. When you need it, it'll be there. Lunches, dinners, drinks, and snacks totaling over 2,000 calories a day. Get free shipping on any order over $99. Again, go to redpills.tv/patriot.
From the spaceship in the sky to the simulation in the mind. Let's all embark on another journey of Conversations on the Fringe.
All right, good evening, everybody. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody is doing well. My name is Josh, and that is my guest tonight, Dr. Bruce Solheim, and he is a returning guest here. He is a Ph.D. professor at Citrus College in Glendora, California, where he teaches paranormal history. Isn't that correct, Bruce?
Yeah, I teach. Well, my main gig is history, but I do a paranormal history class too.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And I mean, you're just a fascinating person to talk about the Vietnam War history, about World War II, so on and so forth, as well as you are a psychic medium and you are very integrated into the UFO phenomena. And you've came up with this one theory that we call the quantum nexus. And I hope you know that when you said this, it changed my perspective forever. Wow. That I use this all the time now. Like,
oh, cool.
The last few guests that I've had, they would be talking about various aspects of consciousness. I'd be like, well, that's the quantum nexus. Look, everything, if you take UFOs, if you take ghosts, if you take, shadow people or interdimensional beings or whatever they might be, angels, there's one foundational aspect, and that's consciousness. They're all conscious entities, conscious beings, and that brings us to this quantum nexus. And so, I appreciate you for that, because you red-pilled me when you put that thought in my head. And it completely changed my perspective.
I would say you were already there, Joshua. I just kind of have, I have it's from my dad and my mom. They're very practical people. They only had 6 years of formal education, but man, they were smart about just understanding what's the most important elemental thing. So that's kind of how I break everything down. And it just seemed to make sense to me. So you were already there. You were talking about all this stuff. You knew the connections, but in your experiences and what, people you've talked to and what you've learned. But quantum nexus is kind of a cool concept. It's a nice term.
It absolutely is. And, when I start to look at it in a certain perspective, it starts drawing about a lot of answers that people might have, because, we tend to look at, and I believe these were your words, we tend to look at the UFO phenomena as separate from the paranormal phenomena. Mm-hmm. And that necessarily isn't true. These all are interrelated because they're all derived from a foundation of consciousness. This is all consciousness interacting with humanity in various forms.
Exactly.
And, I mean, it's a brilliant idea. I'm not gonna lie. What have you been up to, man? How you been?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Still teaching. My day job. I teach history at Citrus College. Everything online. I'll be back in the classroom in the fall. I'm kind of ready, I think, to go back to the classroom, and I'll be teaching the Vietnam War in person, which is always a good class to teach in person, because I can bring in my guest speakers and just have a well, I can't say have a great time, but have an interesting time, because it's always, I mean, how the story ends. It's not a very good ending, but getting there and helping young people understand it is pretty cool. And I just published another comic book, Dr. Jekyll, Alien Hunter. Yep. And it's a spin-off from the Snarc comic books. I've done 2 of those, so I'm still publishing comic books. And then I think last time I was there, I think I talked about Anzar, the book that came out last year. So, yeah, so I just, and I have a couple projects going on with Ciro, one in particular that would be kind of interesting to talk about, involving Anzar. So I'm kind of branching him out.
Very cool. So you have Timeless Trinity, Timeless Deja Vu. You have the Snarc comics, which I have both of them. I have the Anzar as well. And then you have Dr. Jekyll, Alien Hunter, which is a new one. Yeah. So I urge everybody to go to OlavSolheim.com. Vince is going to throw that link out there for everybody and all the chats, and check out his books and pick them up if you're interested. I mean, these are fantastic. The comic books are cool because they're not just fiction. They drive truth within them. A lot of factual information is pumped into these.
That's how I pass along a lot of what I've learned through these comic books and through the entertainment media of comic books. Although I take them very seriously, that's one way to do it. Now, I forgot to mention, we're on the 4th episode of an animated Snarc series we've been doing on YouTube. The 4th installment comes out tomorrow morning. We do it on Saturday morning, like the old traditional Saturday morning cartoons. They're like 5-7 minute segments. And it's been a lot of fun doing the animation for that. Well, I didn't do the animation, but, technical wizards did the animation.
Right.
So it's pretty cool. So, yeah, I got a lot of stuff going on. And, I totally agree with you about fiction. A friend of mine who passed away, a Vietnam vet named David Wilson, he was the first one to tell me that fiction is truer than nonfiction. And because everything is autobiographical for most writers. When you're writing about fictional characters, there's composite characters, there's you in some of the characters. Like, for instance, Ginger, my wife, says that I'm really Snarc. This alien hybrid, kind of innocent character trying to understand everything. So it's funny how that happens in fiction, because, the old saying is you write what you know, right? Yeah. So you know yourself best. Most of us do. At least we try. Yeah. So that's how it comes out. But that's all the different things I'm doing, and I'm excited about all of it. It's hard to say which thing I like best, but it just all keeps happening.
And that's true. That's kind of life, right? Is sometimes we get overloaded with the things that are happening external to us, and we forget to kind of organize those things inside of us, which allow us to kind of really optimize who we are. It allows us to really truly shine for who we are. And I look at a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people all the time. And, I don't judge a person based upon success or any of those things. I look at them in the sense of their accomplishments. I look at them in the sense of their actions. And when you see person's actions and how they derive certain accomplishments, you can get a good understanding of how well that person knows themselves and how well they have this understanding of their inner being and that connected to their inner being, to their physical life, body, and consciousness.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know, this concept of integration is kind of interesting, because when I first started contacting Anzar, this ancient alien mystic, a few years ago. Well, actually, he's been in my life, my whole life, but you know, on a regular basis, contacting him. I talked to a friend of mine who's a Native American shaman, or in that tradition, you know, and she talked about integration, and Anzar talked about integration, and I was kind of afraid of that concept. You know, what are you talking about, integration? And but it's really just an integration with who we are, the real us, you know, the spirit us, with this physical manifestation that we see here with us, and understanding that connection, which is really what ancient people did. They did it as a matter of, you know, that's their normal way of being, where we see this kind of separateness. So we don't feel the connection. And that's why I think a lot of people are so lonely and depressed, because they don't know the power that they have. They don't know the spiritual part of them, this other part of them that is, you know, once you integrate that, you're a fuller person and a happier person, I think. You know, not that you can be happy 24/7, but I think that it gives you purpose and gives you drive and direction, and you know, things will go better.
Yeah. Have you talked to Anzar lately?
I do, not as often as I used to, because when I do, I found out that my recent communications have been, you know, because of what's going on in the world, it's pretty heavy stuff. So I try to do, like, every 7 to 10 days instead of like 3 times a week, which I was doing. Now I still document all of it. I still record it, you know, what I hear, what I see, and then transcribe it when I get home. So that's ongoing. But it's a lot of dark stuff with those, you know, those star people, I guess they prefer to be called, or as he calls, I asked Anzar, I said, do you mind being called an alien? And he said, well, how would you like to be called an alien? He said, look it up in the dictionary. And I looked it up, you know, I thought, oh yeah, that's not a very good you know, that's not flattering. So I guess, yeah. So he said, I said, well, what do you think? He said, how about star family? Because we're all connected, and we're connected through the stars, you know? So I guess that, you know, I'm not trying to be politically correct. I'm just trying to be more accurate, you know? I mean, I guess that's what it's all about. But it's been pretty dark stuff. You know, there are, as we know, there are human forces here on Earth that are doing very bad things and inspired to do very bad things. And they're being pushed and pulled and prodded and encouraged by those that don't wish us well. And it's an ongoing battle, if you will, constantly. And so as a result of those very dark messages I was getting, you know, about Russia, about China, you know, about nuclear weapons and, you know, that kind of stuff, I was inspired, and Anzar agreed to start this kind of focus group within CERO, which is the Close Encounter Resource Organization led by Yvonne Smith, who's a hypnotherapist. She's been doing it for like 30 years, and she was trained by Bud Hopkins and all these big names, you know, in ufology. And so we get together. We've gotten together a couple of times with this friend of mine who's a Native American shaman, in that tradition anyway. And we have connected to Anzar. So it's not just me and Anzar anymore. It's like a group that is now contacting him. And then other star people also get involved. And there are other visitors too. It's like it's like the old Johnny Carson show or something. It's kind of funny how it happens. And yeah, so we're having another one coming up. And one of the things I'll tell you, there is hope, though, because what I was told is that it's very, so for your listeners that are very discouraged about what's going on, Anzar told me there is more love than you could ever imagine. in the quantum world, the spirit world, the alien world. There's more love than you could ever imagine, but there's also more danger than you could ever imagine as well. So it's like almost beyond imagination. But there are those forces, like he represents them, that want to help us and are trying to help us, but don't want to do for us. It's like, parental, you don't want to be a hovering parent. You want to be a parent that encourages self-determination and independence, but yet, try to safeguard your children at the critical moment when they really need it,
Yeah.
So those are the messages I'm getting, and it's not going to end anytime soon. And he's still telling me that there's going to be this leap of consciousness that will take us on this next evolutionary step, and it's going to be a big one. But there's a lot of resistance to it, because a lot of the star beings, those in that other world, they would not like to see this transformation because it doesn't serve their purposes.
Right.
It's kind of threatening in a way. Like a lot of people, when they realize that somebody's gaining strength, maybe they don't want to have a challenger. They don't want to have somebody that can actually hold their own. So that's kind of what's going on right now.
It's really interesting. So I'm doing a new series, a new podcast series with David Whitehead, DW Truth Warrior. He's done a few on ancient aliens a while back. We've had a few people on there, Mike Barra. We're having Michael Cremo on next week. We're having a few people on this week. But the Mars Chronicles it's called the Mars Chronicles. And what we look at is we're looking at Earth, Moon, Mars, and various different anomalies that occur from those different things. Ancient civilizations, we're deep diving into ancient civilizations. And then also I look at the occult perspective. So David is very well versed into the occult. His mentor is a guy by the name of Michael Tessarian, who is a prolific writer on the occult and esoteric mysteries. And they do a podcast called Unslaved together. But David and I look at it from a very, very historical, esoteric, occult perspective, and try to pull away all the crap and try to find the truth. One of the things that I uncovered this actually about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And it was very similar to what you were just saying in the sense of evolution, of this quantum jump that we're doing in consciousness. Because whenever we think of evolution, most people think about physical body adaptation, evolutionary adaptation. In reality, though, is if everything is foundational upon consciousness, all evolution is derived from points of consciousness. And I looked at things in the sense of cycles. And I've looked and watched nature. I've looked and watched the universe, the stars. Our current solar theory is a star starts producing lighter elements, hydrogen, helium, and they start collapsing that on top of each other until it becomes a critical mass. It explodes into a supernova. All those new heavy elements go out, and then it coalesces again, and those heavy elements produce a bigger star, which starts this process all over again. And so what we see in the universe, what we see in nature, is we see this evolutionary trend that everything in the material universe, or even in the spiritual world, is evolving to higher degrees of what I would call optimization. So I said, why is the universe doing that, number one? Unless that is a protocol, a principle upon which the universe is based. And if it is, then that means that it is built into the fabric of the universe of how things evolve. And so I started looking at the whole resurrection story, December 25th, the paganistic stories of rebirth, resurrection, Osiris, Isis, the Egyptian mysteries. And we have something that's called an analemma. An analemma is the sun's transit through the solar system as viewed from Earth. And if you watch the sun every day in the sky and you put a dot in the sky, the sun's going to do this trek through the sky that forms a figure eight. Okay, the infinity symbol. The middle part of the figure eight is the two equinoxes. Then you have the summer solstice and you have the winter solstice. And now the winter solstice is this point in time developed by the great calendars, recorded by all these ancient civilizations, written about. Many theological religions are based upon this simple understanding. And so I said, well, if our sun does it, then our moon does it. And our moon does it 29.5 days through the sky and does an analemma. And so this is an observer perspective, but it's representing the cycle that's actually occurring. So I said, well, that means that our solar system is doing the same thing through the galactic center. And that means that we have 4 seasons that operate through the movement of our precessional sequence through the galactic center. And I said, I bet you, and for the longest time, I thought we were kind of in the middle coming in the spring. But now I said, I bet you, after doing this series with David Whitehead, I bet you we're coming in the winter in that point of resurrection, that point of rebirth. And sure enough, the age of Aquarius is that point of rebirth. It's that December 25th on our solar transit through the galaxy's arm. And we're about to come to that point of resurrection. And we know that this is like this magical time. So I looked at it and I said, what if this is what the ancient civilizations were talking about, is that the universe has prescribed within it the certain points of evolution that occur, whether it's the flow of energy into the DNA, which vibrates and resonates the conscious body, increasing it to higher degrees of consciousness, or maybe something that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at this, and I started seeing these trends through occultism and through esotericism that were really hiding this information, but it was right there in front of us that the universe has this built-in mechanism for conscious evolution in it, and it occurs at the end of every one of these cycles. And so when you said this, you're absolutely spot on, 100% correct in the sense of where my research has led, in the sense of how this cycle operates, and that we're about to hit this point to where we increase, I guess, our vibrational acuity and start increasing our conscious awareness. And I think that a lot of this that's happening right now has to do with it, because it's interesting because you have the 3 days where the sun sits still in the sky on the rising of the winter solstice. So if you watch the sun every day through the sky at the point of rising, you'll notice that it inclinates 1 degree every day. But if you watch it between December 22nd to the 24th, you'll notice that it doesn't. It seems to sit in the same spot and sets on the solar cross, the southern cross, the crux. And this is just kind of like observational of how it happens. It's an illusion. But this is considered the shortest days of the year, or the darkest days of the year. And so we truly have to go through this points of darkness, these 3 points of darkness, to go into these points of light, of regression, of resurrection, of these points of rebirth. And so I'm seeing this in all these cycles that we're talking about here. And I just found it really interesting that, you get this from Anzar, and you're writing about it. And I have people who've never heard of anything that we're all talking about, who are getting it from other sources and talking about it. So it's just a crazy time to be alive. But what is your thoughts on that the universe has this fundamental principle built into it for conscious evolution?
Yeah, I think, I think you articulated it very well. And Anzar has told me that the leap of consciousness will lead to an era of reconversion. So that seems to go along with what you're saying, is that, when I asked him for more details, he said that this reconversion is where the wisdom of the ancients is mixed or blended with the modern science and technology that we have, so that we don't just have scientific materialism, but we have this true understanding of the nature of consciousness and our place in the universe, and that will come together harmoniously. And things will be a lot better. But the resistance to that is the problem, and that's where we're in that resistance phase. And I couldn't help but think when you were talking that, I've lived in Norway during the summer, in 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, on the island where my parents are from, and I've lived there during the winter, when during the dark time, as they call it. And those people up north are very, and especially the indigenous people, the reindeer herders, are so in tune with the earth and the cycles of it, because it's so pronounced for them. The seasons are pronounced for us, not so much in Southern California, where it seems like it's summer all the time, but it's either hot summer or just summer. That's what it seems like to me. But in places like in the northern, latitudes, or in the north, the high north, that dark time really makes you understand that it's not just this seasonal thing, but it's a universal thing. And it's a in a microcosm what it is in the macrocosm. So, and you have to go through the dark to get to the light. And that's what we're getting to. And I feel confident. I'm optimistic about where we're heading, but I'm not, I'm realistic about the pain that's going to be inflicted on a lot of folks before we get there. So I think that's the best way to look at it, and the healthiest way to look at it, and so it's not surprising that a lot of things seem to be breaking down, whether it's, customs and laws, and for a lot of people, it just seems so random. It's like, why did all this stuff start happening? But it's part of this natural cycle that you're talking about. It's just that a much longer cycle. People are used to short cycles, and this is a very long cycle. So we don't, it's like any graph. You take any one section of a graph and you try to interpret, okay, things are going up, and then you look at the larger, oh, wait a second, that's really part of something that's generally going down. So, we don't have, generally, most people don't have that big picture. So what you're trying to do, what we're trying to do, and a lot of folks are trying to do who are dealing with consciousness, is trying to see a bigger picture, and then really see where we're at. So anyway, that's my simple understanding of the articulation of the concept that you did. But I think it's where we need to, we don't really have a choice. It's happening no matter what. So we have to adjust to it. And just smaller cycles. A lot of people don't think in those terms, even though they live it, with the seasons. Like I talked in everything, like in U.S. history, we have 40-year presidential cycles where every 40 years we have a paradigm shift where politics shifts left or right of center. And in 1980, we had the conservative revolution with Ronald Reagan, so it moved right of center, and it stayed that way, even though there were Democratic presidents who were liberal, but they were constrained by the center having shifted, the whole center of politics. And now it's shifted back to the left, and people are making the adjustments, and that's why there's so much, confusion. But it's kind of a natural cycle within our body politic, which is kind of interesting. It's a real extreme microcosm of what we're talking about, but everything is related to these cycles. And the more you understand that, the more you realize that it is all connected, and it's absolutely amazing, and it's humbling, that we're part of this. But at the same time, we have, then people say, well, it's all just fate. Why even try? It's already predetermined. Well, no, there's also free will, which is part of that, and that's the big debate. How much is free will and how much is fate? And it's really, I think Native Americans say it. I've heard one talking about it, a medicine man, and he said that it's really both. It's a combination of both. That you do have some, there's something driving you, but you're driving something else. I think the guy who invented the first commercially licensed helicopter, oh God, what was his name? I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, he used the example of, your fingers are manipulated by your hand, which are manipulated by your arm, which is manipulated by your shoulder, which, everything is subservient to something else, but it's all connected,
Right.
It's an incredible system to the brain, which is the great consciousness, I guess, if you think about it.
Yeah. So in the mysteries, we actually talk, there's theories upon how this comes about, and you're spot on. I mean, you can go into various aspects of Solomon's Temple with the two pillars where you got to find the doorway. You can go to Buddhism with the middle path. And the middle path is this fate-oriented path. It's the synchronization of the vibration that you set before you came to this place, where you're aligned with it. But it's derived from a mental discipline, in the sense where you're not just doing what you want, but you set your intention and you flow with it. Whereas the free will, the kind of like the free-oriented human being, they work on the fringes of that middle path, where it's more unrestrictive, a little less undisciplined, but that you kind of have this convergence of it to where through that discipline, free will is amplified and initiated along that path of fate. So very cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever read William Strauss's Fourth Turning or Generations?
I haven't. I just remember the guy's name, Arthur Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, first commercially licensed helicopter. Arthur Young, brilliant guy, passed away many years ago. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
no, I haven't heard of that book. No.
Okay, so you're just talking about the 40-year political cycle. The book, The Fourth Turning, and the newer updated one, I think, came out in '98. These are two college professors, statisticians, and they wrote another book called Generations. But basically what this talks about is a 90-year cycle of humanity. That humanity is on this 90-year cycle that occurs, and that it's incredibly predictable. In their book, they wrote in Generations, they said in 2019 there would be some type of virus and pandemic which would cause for a political revolution. The revolution would most likely lead to another world war. And I mean, these guys have been spot on, and all they do is they just look at 90 years of history. You go and you go back 90 years, you get World War II, 90 years before that, Civil War, and 90 years before that, Revolutionary War, and you can start seeing the trend line. And I had a gentleman on a few weeks ago, and he's all about sun cycles. And he starts talking about this without knowing about the Fourth Turning, in the sense of these 90-year cycles that occur with humanity, kind of like the 270-day gestation period of a woman giving birth, is that we have these other cycles that are completely attributed directly to the solar cycles. And the solar cycles are directly attributed to the galactic cycles. And so it's just a reaffirmation of what you're talking about right there with these cycles, in that we are dominated and ruled by these various different cycles. It's fascinating stuff. I introduce my students to these cycles, and they're so used to this thinking this linear way that, okay, one thing happens, then another thing happens, and so forth. Or maybe they'll get as far as to cause and effect, but they don't see how it's all connected and that there's actually cycles. And once they see that, they see, oh, well, I can kind of prepare for the future based on understanding these cycles. And I said, exactly. You can't really accurately predict, but you can certainly prepare for certain outcomes that are probably very highly probable going to happen. And the other thing I wanted to mention that kind of, in a strange way, might impact this is in rotorcraft aerodynamics. So in helicopter, when Arthur Young was trying to figure out how do you control this helicopter, it's got this rotating disc, the rotors, the main rotors going over the head. They found out that they had a great deal of trouble controlling it because they didn't realize that the actuator had to be in a 90-degree angle to where you wanted to go because of the, I forgot the principle, but anyway, so it was in a 90-degree angle. So if you wanted to go forward, it would have to start 90 degrees from, where you're going. So he came down to, he said, all life is 90-degree angles, this idea of, that it boils down to, everything, that, and if you think about it, if it's less than that, if it's 90 degrees, they'll never, it'll never intersect. Yeah. But I don't totally understand, because this guy was so brilliant that he's, he classified everything by the periodic table. He explained everything by the periodic table. He was just an amazing genius. And to sit around, he wasn't even an engineer. Huh. He was just, I think he was a philosopher, but he thought, he went to the patent office and he said, nobody's figured out really how to commercially do this thing with the helicopter. Sikorsky did what he did. And of course, Da Vinci came up with the air screw or whatever, many, centuries ago. But he figured out, this is a problem that I want to solve. And he just used his intellect, even though he didn't have an engineering training, and he learned engineering so he could do it. And it's so inspirational for folks who maybe don't have the formal training, but they have the extreme interest in getting a problem solved. And really, that's what it takes. If you put everything into solving a problem, if more of us did that,
it would probably be a better world, if we didn't wait until, oh, I have to have a certain degree so I can do this. Well, maybe you don't. It might help just to get the background, but you can self-empower yourself. I think of my parents. I mentioned earlier, they only had 6 years of formal education, but my dad built houses based on blueprints, and he did it himself. I mean, I couldn't do that. I could probably, if I learned, and it would take a long time, but he could do that, and was a master builder. And my mom was an artist and had an incredible understanding. She was very psychic too, and she had a credible understanding of how things worked. She took me at age 10. She took me to a Native American protest in Seattle because she wanted me to see the Indians' perspective on things, because I'd been watching John Wayne movies. So I thought, oh, I know the West. I played cowboys and Indian. Nobody wanted to be the Indians. Everybody wanted to be the cowboys. So she said, I think this boy needs to go talk to some real Indians, which I'd never done. And I did. And I found out about, their treaty rights and stuff. So, which fed into me becoming a historian. Now, did she know that was going to happen? I don't know. But, she had that insight. And a lot of people, even though I'm in education and I encourage people to be formally educated, obviously, there's a lot of education that goes on outside of the formal structure. And I think universities and colleges better respond to that. They better understand that people, it's just not an automatic thing. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people getting college degrees who can't get a job that's commensurate with their training, what they expected from it, because of the reality of the job market. So anyway, I just think that part of that leap of consciousness is understanding who we are as natural people, and we're natural problem solvers. And if we get out of our own way, if sometimes these politicians, it's just so, because I see the subtext all the time. It's frustrating because I hear them talk and I don't hear the words they're saying. I hear the subtext, because that's what you do when you're a psychic. You don't necessarily you hear the subtext. What do they mean? What's their intent? And it's always some negative. It's like, I'm going to destroy my opponent and get all glory for myself. That's what I hear every time they say something. I don't care who they are, Republicans, Democrats. They all seem to be with very few exceptions. I think there are some that are untainted, but very, very few. Most of them, the subtext is very selfish. And anyway, I kind of got off on a tangent there. Sorry.
No. And one thing I've been doing lately is I've been trying to very much hone in on my own kind of inner dialogue. I've been doing the Silva mind control method, which I found absolutely amazing. Just the way that they set up. I'm actually doing Ultra Mind through Mind Valley, but it's fantastic. I'm absolutely loving it. It's giving me. I have massive amounts of information just flowing in, and for the longest time with me, is I would have information flow into my mind. From all different sources. I look at something, I focus on it, and all of a sudden I have thoughts and ideas coming in, and I research them, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this was right, this was true. It's very psychic in nature. So I decided to kind of hone in on it, but discipline it in a certain sense to see if I could actually utilize it. And lately, things have been very, very interesting. We do the daily podcast that talks about a lot of the geopolitical, geomilitaristic, social, cultural issues, a lot of these things. And I've been making a lot of predictions, and these are coming in the sense of just analyzing these things through deep thought, and they're all coming true, and that's not good.
It can be very disturbing and kind of almost overwhelming sometimes. And that's part of the reason that I cut down on my what I call my spirit walks, which I still take walks. So I still do meditative walks, but I don't make the spirit connection other than once a week or every 10 days, because they get so intense. And the more trained, like yourself or like myself, that I've been doing this a while, the more trained you are, the deeper you get into it, and the more taxing it is physically and mentally, so when you come back, you're supposed to feel refreshed after a nice meditative walk, and instead you're kind of worn out, and you might need to lie down for a minute, and it could be just the fact that, 63 now, but that could be a factor too. But no, I think it's how deep you get into it, and you start to understand these things, and then you realize how much can you really say, because I found, and you probably found this out too, there are these debunkers and these people who are just professional naysayers and then just trolls, internet trolls, that are out there just to defame everything you do or you say. You're trying to help, trying to pass on some information that might be helpful, and they're out there. And I'm not like, I don't want people to feel sorry for me, and I'm just saying that you have to be careful, because those people are out there. I don't even think they know they're not helping. I think they think they're helping.
Yeah.
And they're really not. Not to say that there aren't, in the psychic business or the UFO business or whatever, there aren't charlatans, because there definitely are people cashing in on people's worst fears and worst of all, their grief and sadness, with psychics that pretend, and I know but that, this stuff is real, and it drives me crazy when these people take advantage of people. That's why when I get people who ask me, can you do a psychic reading for me? I said, I'm sorry, I really can't. I mean, I could, but and they said, well, how much do you charge? I said, I don't charge anything, because I don't do it. I don't want to take your money.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be a money thing. I want it to be, I'm helping somebody. So the only time I ever do it is when, like, a friend or a colleague, asks me to, and they're in a great deal of pain. And I say, okay, I will try to help you, but I can't promise anything. And it's not 100% accurate, but I will do it out of the kindness of my heart for you. And that makes it real. If there's money involved, then all of us have the ability to delude ourselves. So, you have to be very careful. What is the true motivation? It's just to help. And that was one of the first things I read from very experienced psychics. Number one rule is it has to be you're helping somebody. That's what it is. Kind of like with doctors, the number one rule is the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. Right. It's kind of the same thing, only not only do no harm, but, actually try to help somebody. Don't make fame or fortune, the motivator. So that, and that leads along the same lines that you're saying, these empowering things, mind control and all this. I mean, it's all incredible stuff, but, everybody has to be aware that, and I don't want to overly simplify it, but let me use Star Wars as an example, with the Force, that's the clear example. There is an easy path for all this stuff. The problem is that, the dark side, right? I mean, there is an easy path, and you can actually get people to do what you want and stuff. But if you're doing something to somebody to get them to do something against their will, because you have a greedy desire for, money or fame or whatever it might be, then, that will bring you down. That is going to, you might get a temporary, fix or high or whatever you want to call it from it, power surge, but eventually that will get you wrapped around the axle, and you'll start on a downward spiral. So these are precious gifts that we have, that all of us really have, and many of us are trying to train them and do good in the world. And so it is a sacred, precious gift, and we have to be very, very careful with it. And I think it's great that you're doing all this training and expanding already the where you're at. And you talk to so many different interesting people that give you different aspects of and directions you could go in. But it is kind of a cautionary tale too. Yeah. I have found with me, I'm just talking about myself. I don't think I'm the only one, but there is that temptation to, okay, I know how to make this stuff happen. What if I really am angry with somebody? Can I make something bad happen to them? You probably could, but should you? No, you should not. You have to resist that. That's why Anzar, every single time I talk to him, and especially when I'm angry about something, he will remind me, he'll say, always keep love in your heart and operate from a position of love. And if you do that, that'll keep you from going down those other, paths. So stay the way of the Jedi, right?
I love that. It's something that we were actually talking about on the Mars Chronicles. we were talking about, in a sense, that George Lucas actually used
Yes.
who was it? Joseph Campbell's.
Joseph Campbell, yeah, The Power of Myth. Yeah.
Right, The Power of Myth. He actually consulted with Joseph Campbell to help write Star Wars, and some people even think, conspiracy theory out there, is that George Lucas was given the storyline. And really what they're talking about is it wasn't a galaxy far, far away. It was actually here in our solar system, in our galaxy, and that it was an ancient civilization that used to live amongst the stars, and it was the birth of us, and it destroyed itself, or got destroyed through cataclysm or whatnot, and that there was Jedis. There was these people who utilize this force that propagates the entire universe, that is the guiding life force.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Do you think that the universe has this field or this fabric, and is this really what we're tying into as psychics, as mediums, or what?
Yeah, it's, like we talked about at the start, this idea of the quantum nexus. That's the term that we might use for the force. This idea that what happens in the spirit world, what happens with aliens, and all the paranormal stuff is actually the same as the quantum world, and the way the subatomic world works is totally different than the interface that we have. The interface, just like a computer, we have a keyboard, we have voice, whatever, but we don't see the actual toggling of voltages going on, which is really what's happening when we're using this medium. And so because we use interfaces, so our everyday reality is an interface for what is actually going on in the quantum world. And that way it becomes more understandable and comfortable to us. And every once in a while, even if you don't consider yourself a psychic, a person will catch a glimpse of that other world, and they'll go, whoa, what was that? They just saw behind the, like in the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, they saw actually behind the interface. And this kind of stuff, if you pay attention to it, happens a lot. And then if you train yourself, like yourself or me or many others, then you can actually get there, not by accident, and train yourself to utilize that for, to do good things and to, make good stuff happen. And so that quantum, that's why I did, when I started this journey seriously trying to manage the paranormal in my life, this power, this gift I've been given, I studied quantum physics. That's one of the first things I studied was quantum physics, because it just made sense to me. Now, I'm not claiming to be a scientist and totally understand it. I'm just saying that it makes sense, what I've learned about it. And I've talked to scientists about it, and they've acknowledged that. A friend of mine, E.M. Young, not Edwin Young, not the Young, not Arthur Young we're talking about earlier, was a scientist. He ran a psychic laboratory at Stanford in the 70s. And he's actually, anyway, I guess I'm not supposed to say exactly what he does, but he kind of advises me. So I have a couple of advisors that are not in the other world, that are actually in this world, but working with the other world as well. So those kind of, I guess he's kind of like Obi-Wan or something. And then there are those in the other world who help us too, like in my case, Anzar, and my friend Gene, who's, he was just a regular guy, but he was my friend, and he passed on in 2016. He was the guy who actually got me started to formalize all this stuff and tell my stories. So I owe him. Every time I talk to somebody, I always have to mention Gene, because Gene's always with me. He's there kind of looking over my shoulder. But, and he was the one who told me that, I said, what is this about aliens? I was trying to figure it out early on. And I was hatching some ideas. I hadn't got to the quantum nexus yet. And he said, hey, we are the aliens. And I said, what do you mean? Like you, like ghosts? So you? And he said, all of us, we are the aliens. Which means that we're a star family, which is exactly what Anzar has been saying the whole time. And it brings up this whole idea of how many times has this gone round and round? Did we come here from somewhere else, which I believe we did? And how many times is it going to go around? What was it in Lord of the Rings? What was it? How many different cycles had they talked about? The beginning and the end, and then it cycles around again. Tolkien was that was part of his ethos or whatever, part of his mythology. But anyway, it's just I enjoy talking to people about this stuff. I especially enjoy talking to you. You have a very deep knowledge of it and appreciation, and it's always fun to get into this stuff. To do a kind of almost a hackneyed phrase now, a deep dive into it. I wish I could use a different term. Maybe spelunking or something into this stuff. Because you do have to get underneath. It is like it is in some ways like going into a deep cave.
Right. Well, and I think a lot is that we live so much within our own mind that we forget that we live so much in our own mind, but the perception is that we live in this external world, that everything is external to us. And we forget about that. And we get so accustomed to what's happening around us that we forget about what's really going on, that everything is being created within us. And that goes back to having that heart that's full of love and doing everything from that point of love, as well as, the psychic idea. I've always looked at it in the sense that I look at everything in vibration, or I look at everything as oscillation or resonance and frequency, and that you're always trying to match something. And that I look at it in the sense that there's this permeating field in the universe, a substrate of reality, and that everything is formulated within the substrate of reality, which means that all matter, gross matter doesn't matter, is, even if it's inanimate, has a certain resemblance of consciousness in it. Everything is conscious at the quantum, subquantum, Planck level. Doesn't really matter, but it takes a certain vibrational level in order for that consciousness to become self-aware and self-organized. In that we're integrating with this field continuously every day. We are the field in a sense, and that the field is information. And that information can be harnessed and pulled out at any point in time, because the linearity of time is only through our own individualized experience. And that the orthogonal time, if you want to call it, the whole plethora of time that's ever existed, all exists right now in this moment. And that we could literally pull out the information that we need by tapping into this field at the right vibration or the right frequency, if we must, that correlates to that time. The date and time and the level where the universe is progressing to. I've always imagined that I'm a closet physicist as well. I went to CU Boulder for 3 years, studied physics because I was heavily into the occult and esoteric mysteries, and I started noticing what they were talking about was a lot of science. And I'm like, well, let's go and test these theories out. And so one of the things I noticed is that the universe is ever expanding. This is one of the theories of physics. And I said, if the universe is ever expanding, that doesn't mean that it's expanding at the edges. And I think this is a big misconception for people who don't dabble in physics. It means that every atom, that every morsel of this universe is expanding in its own little space. And that the universe expansion is not like blowing up a bubble, but instead like the oxygen molecules inside the bubble expanding from their center point of radius. And I looked at that in the sense that if that's the case, then there has to be some increase of vibration. And I looked at it in the sense of vibration. Is what if what's really happening is not necessarily that the universe is expanding, but it's increasing its vibrational rate or its oscillatory rate. And we appears in the physical world as an expansional aspect. And so I've always looked at, if you wanted to connect to the past, all you simply have to do is tune in to that past frequency of which you used to exist at, because we exist in this universe as well. If that means that we're expanding at the same rate that the universe is expanding, and that if you understand your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions, and really your emotions, your emotional body is this connectedness to your spiritual world, and that your emotion, I believe, is the communication that comes across from the spiritual world. And it's a communication, a language that we've lost over time. But if you can go back and feel that feeling that you had 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that's matching that resonance of that date and time frame. And you can see those events that appeared in your life so clearly. You can feel them within your being. And if you harness that type of skill set, you can do it for the future as well. As like, wow, in the future, I'm going to feel this way. And you can kind of match that and feel that. Burt Goldman, who does quantum jumping. He's fantastic at this. He does it in the sense that everybody has a doppelganger in this multiverse, and that in one multiverse you're a concert pianist, and all you have to do is match your vibration to that doppelganger, and you can become a concert pianist by sitting in with your doppelganger and feeling what they're doing, matching the brain synchronicity of what they're doing when they play piano. He's 92 years old, I think, and he's a published author. He's a published artist. His paintings sell between $10,000 to $20,000. He's a master photographer. He is a concert pianist, and he taught all of himself these skills within the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And just fascinating, but this is the process that he uses. And so I look at being as psychics as someone who has this natural ability to kind of tune in to these various degrees of reality at different vibrational levels.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is exactly what my physicist friend, E.M. Young, Dr. Young, says, that basically what's going on with these extraterrestrial star people is that they're vibrating in and out of he uses the term vibrating in and out of our reality. And that's exactly what ghosts and spirits do at this, as well. And, talking about, you made me think when you're talking about the past, if you get to that vibrational level or frequency or whatever you want to call it, that yes, you can do that. And there are physical manifestations of that are usually related to trauma. Like if people in the military, or not just people in the military, but anybody who's been through trauma can have flashbacks. And those flashbacks are real. I mean, you are really back in Vietnam, or you're back in a tornado, or whatever your traumatic thing was. And you have all the sensations, you have everything that was there at that time, because you're at that harmonic frequency, or at that frequency of that point in time. And so a flashback is simply an illustration, a psychological illustration. But if you talk to people who have flashbacks, they're very, very real. And they are real. I think they are real. And that's what makes them so powerful. It's not just, I had a bad memory of something. It's like, no, you're there.
Yeah. Everybody
around you has taken on the shape or the image of whatever was there when you had the trauma. And because people are so frightened by it, they become where they can't sleep. And instead of dealing with it as a pretty remarkable tool that you could use, it's like, okay, I'm going to go back to the trauma and I'm going to change things a little bit, rather than being afraid of it. Say, I'm going to, and they call this, in the VA, they call this some kind of therapy. I forgot what it's called, but anyway, they take people back. In other words, they induce the flashback.
Right.
And it's very risky, because some people have a great deal of trouble handling it, or they might get out of control and be violent or something. But I think they call it immersion therapy.
Yes.
And it's a version of taking them at least partly to the flashback, but it's exactly what you're talking about. And so we already have bits and pieces of it, but we don't call it by what it is. It is in a sense time travel, and when you have experiences in our everyday lives that remind you that time is, this linear time is an illusion. I think, I'm not sure if I told you, but a couple of years ago, last time I was on, but my son and I were driving here in Southern California, and I something happened, and I looked down just briefly, and I was coming up to an intersection, and for some reason the light turned, it was green, and just a split second, and then it was red. And I looked up and it was red, and I was going through the intersection about 50 miles an hour, and I was about to be double T-boned. from the side, people going equally fast probably. And for some reason, time slowed down completely, like in the Matrix, where I could turn and accelerate and I just threaded the needle. And when I came out the other side, it all came back to regular time.
Wow.
But for that moment, I had the time to do this. And it's not just that time. I've had where my wife's been in the car and other loved ones have been in the car, where there's been an extreme danger on the freeways here in Southern California. It's an everyday kind of thing, but some terrible things where it seemed like it would be impossible to get out of the situation. Both cars coming from other lanes, you're about to be squished in the middle, and somehow you do this maneuver, but time just slows down so that you can do it. And it is flexible. It is not what people think it is.
Yeah.
And you can, in extreme danger, you can do it. Highly trained athletes can do this. They can manipulate time in a sense, like in baseball. How on earth can anybody hit a 99 mile an hour fastball when you think about it?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems impossible. How could a person do it? And unless you cheat and just start swinging before, but that's not exactly how it works. So they're able to, and you hear this, a good player say, I just slow the ball down. The ball was big to me today. I saw it, I'm seeing the ball today.
Yep.
They're able to manipulate the time because we have the ability to tap into that. But and they call it other things. I think they call it the zone, Yeah.
Flow, mind state, the zone, all these things.
Yeah. And of course, creative people do this all the time. That's why time is immaterial. When you're creating something, a piece of music, like you mentioned, music or art, a whole day could go by and it seems like a minute.
Yep.
Because you're so into the zone, you're no longer in linear time. And so there's so many examples of that people just assume it's just, that's not paranormal. That's not the other dimension. That's just something else. Well, no, it's exactly what you think it is. It is what we manipulate time. We can do it.
I 100% agree. And it's all from the individual perspective. A lot of these gurus, ancient masters, monks, they'll all talk about that there only exists this moment now. There is nothing outside of it. I call it the point of convergence. I say that we all exist at this point of convergence where this reality is being created at this one point of convergence, and that point of convergence is increasing its energy potential over and over and over to a certain point of optimization, and that the past and the future are accessible by just obtaining, former points of convergence's resonant frequency. So I 100% agree with you on all this. Now, Dr. Stephen Greer, he talks about a lot of this in the sense of aliens, and they'll go do their CE5 events, contact events for UFOs and aliens, and they'll do a meditation, and they'll consciously focus their energy on manifesting UFOs, and these things will show up. I just watched a video the other day of this guy. He calls himself the Prophet Jehovah. Mm-hmm. And he's a black man who claims to be the Prophet Jehovah. And he said by reading the Old Testament, he found out how to summon UFOs. And this Channel 8 News went and interviewed him, and they took him out to a little park to kind of laugh at him. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, seriously, this is real. I can do this. And they're all watching it with the video camera, and he goes and starts praying. And all of a sudden, in the sky, you get this yellow orb, this glowing yellow orb. And they're like, oh my God, like they're taping it on the local news, and the guy calls up his channel manager and goes, oh no, he did it. It's really there. It appeared, and it was moving. It went to the Air Force Base. It came back, and it came back. It was over top of them. But that brings us to this next point. And this is a revelation I had one day. Mm-hmm. I was sitting with a friend, and we were drinking a few beers and having a few cigars. We were talking, and we were in this deep contemplative thought. And we were outside on a clear summer night looking at the stars. And I said, the water's meant for fish. The land is meant for man. The air is meant for birds. Mm-hmm. What is space meant for? Because if you look at all these environments, they all the life forms adapt towards that environment. So if you have this vacuum of space that's eternally cold near absolute zero, I said the only thing that can survive there is spirit. And we started talking about this, and I said, well, what if we were, all spirits are born within the universe, within the outer space of the universe, and we transit the universe, and we get all of our energy, our food from these suns. And the objective is to go to the suns, but there's one rule: never go towards those planets. Those planets will pull you in. They're like a vacuum. They'll suck you in, and all of a sudden you'll be birthed into that planet. And it's kind of like a reset, like falling down the tunnel in Mario Brothers, right? And we envision this. But when we start to look at it, is that there's more to this idea that our spiritual nature is kind of outside of time. That it is we experience time in this physical reality, but that's not necessarily what time is. In that time is dependent upon these various different planular places we live. So we live in just the physical world right now, but if we were in space, time is much, much different. It's experienced much, much different. And then our spirit and our soul, I look at as kind of always moving towards these various points of optimization, but kind of outside of time. In that time itself is more of a physical phenomenon. What I call the point of convergence is increasing its vibrational rate. I know I went off on a tangent there, but
no, it's just exactly in different words, but basically what one of the first things Gene told me when he came to me a month after he died, and or had left this existence to the next. And he told me that where he is, there is no past, there's no future. Everything is happening all at once. It's all the eternal now. He called it the eternal now. And I have a quote on I like to put quotes on the wall here, and I have one from the American physicist David Bohm.
Oh, great.
And he said, now is forever, yesterday is now, tomorrow is now, unending. Ultimately, all moments are really one. And he's one of the most David Bohm has really helped me with understanding quantum physics. He's the one that helped me understand this idea of the of this reality that we have, and then what he called it the explicate order
in the intricate order.
Yeah, and then the implicate, and then the super implicate is the mind of God, or the ultimate consciousness, the one, or whatever you want to call it. And he helped me understand that. And so, but what's funny is that he's saying the same thing my friend Gene was saying the same thing you're saying. It's just we're all saying the same thing. It's like Joseph Campbell's talking about all the different creation myths, all these different colorful stories, but it's basically the same story. It's the same story. We're just putting it in different ways. And there's so much power in that and truth to it, that's what is driving us is this pursuit of truth, and which in and of itself, everybody claim, and when we talk about political systems, they're all talking about, oh, that's false, that's not true, but real truth is not, you can't really manipulate it. Mm-hmm. And as Ansar told me about technology, he said these different nation states, our country included, they want to use alien technology and knowledge for their own advancement. And Ansar said that you cannot use alien technology and knowledge for just to advance yourself. It's for the benefit of all, for the benefit of all.
Yeah.
So you can't take it for yourself. So, and I have a friend, retired guy from the FBI, and the old saying, you're never out of the FBI, you're always in the FBI. But he told me, he said our government, and not just our government, but every government, is trying to figure out how can you weaponize this, the UAPs, how can you weaponize this technology, they're so busy doing that they're missing the point that we're talking about, that this leap of consciousness is what this is all leading to, and none of that stuff will be necessary.
Yeah, 100%.
And
speaking of this, the UAPs, the UFOs, and going back to Dr. Greer, is it's where I was going to when I was thinking of that one thought and I got lost in my mind, but is that these technologies that are traversing space, I think that there might be some civilizations that are material in orientation and that have material craft that traverse space through various levels of physical technology. But I think a lot of what we're seeing is conscious technology, that is derived from consciousness. Some of these reports that I've heard from people that been to S4, S1, Area 51, these various different bases and seen these things, is you go inside of them and there's no controls, there's nothing. There's no panels, there's absolutely nothing. You walk inside and it's just metal, and it's all one piece of metal. And the reason is because when you walk in there, it recognizes the resonance of your DNA when you're a certified person who can be in there or alien that can be in there, and everything begins to come up on the digital display screens. But it's all consciously controlled, and these craft operate through what you would call the quantum nexus. This is how the space realm works. It's as we get. It's like density, right? If we went to the core of the Earth, it's incredibly dense. And the further out we get, it gets less and less dense. We go through the water, we're still muffled, but we have some freedom of movement. Then we get onto the surface, and now we have more freedom of movement. We can speak, we can move. You get up into the upper atmosphere, and it's really, really thin, and your freedom of movement is less, is more and more, and there's less and less resistance. You get out into space, and there's complete removal of resistance. And so I look at these points of less and less density or less and less resistance as these constructs that were made for technology, these constructs that were made for the operation of various different technologies, where space would be derived from conscious technology. And so we had this UFO conference, or not the UFO conference, but the hearing in the Senate pertaining to UAPs and UFOs. What are your thoughts on what happened with this?
Yeah, I think it's great that they're doing it, but they're still constrained in a certain way. Of course, we didn't see the closed briefing, so we don't know what's going on. We can kind of guess, and I think what's going on is that they're really concerned about weaponizing, and it's really a shame that that's where they're heading with this. So I don't think they really understand what they got. They're not telling us everything, obviously. I think most people know that. But some of the most disturbing thing, and I can't remember the congressman's name. Maybe I'll think of it later. But he said, is there a way to basically punish people who tell us about UFOs and it's false information, and it's he was basically trying to, is there a way to punish these people? And I'm thinking, wow, he's making himself the arbiter of truth about this and wants to punish people. So, and how is anybody in the military, how is anybody else going to feel free to report things and talk about it freely if there's some force out there that wants to punish you because they say, oh, well, that's not true, but they're the ones determining what the truth. It's almost like when I heard that, I almost thought of the old movie Miracle on 34th Street, when they put Santa Claus on trial, and everybody believes in, they want to believe in Santa Claus, and the children do, and then there's all this political intrigue with the judge and everything. It kind of reminded me of that. And I think some of the people were asking great questions. One senator asked about, and it was kind of bipartisan. Some of them were Republicans, some were Democrats, were asking good questions. One of the best questions was about, I think is it Robert Salas, the guy that used to work at Malmstrom Air Force Base when the nukes got shut down. And they asked those two representatives, the one from the Navy and the one from the Defense Department, what do you guys know about that? What have you investigated that? And they said, we don't, it hasn't been brought to our attention. And, I mean, come on. It hasn't been brought to you. And then the congressman said, well, I'm bringing it to your attention. And they said, well, it's never officially been brought to our attention. He says, we're in a congressional hearing. That's pretty official, and I am bringing it to your attention. Well, we'll have to look into that. Oh, come on now. I mean, that was kind of ridiculous. And are they so narrowly focused on trying to weaponize this technology that they, thinking that, it must be the Chinese. Well, it's not the Chinese. It must be no, it's not. The Russians can't even communicate effectively in the Ukraine. They're using cell phones. You think they have access to all this alien technology? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think they have some information just like we do, but they're all busy trying to figure out how to strap a bomb to it. And they're heading down the wrong direction. So it was frustrating for me. I wasn't surprised, but I like the fact that it's at least being taken somewhat seriously, even though I looked at the major news websites and they were kind of poking fun at it, a little bit. So they still have that, try to bring in that ha-ha factor, but yet there was a congressional hearing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is a step in the right direction, but there's a lot of frustration around that. So those are my initial thoughts anyway on it.
Now, one of the most interesting parts I found about it was the senator that there was the one senator that brought up in the sense of disinformation, misinformation. What do we do to these civilians that are sitting out there throwing these weird conspiracy theories out there? Yes. Is there a way to punish them? Do you hold them accountable? And even the DOD official was like, what are you talking about? This is the United States of America. Who are you to say that stuff? Yeah. But, and that's the logic, though, we have to consider for our current politic, right? Whether you're Republican or Democrat, that's the logic that these people have is, oh my goodness, they're perpetuating false information out there. But the other part is pertaining to the nuclear facilities. The same congressman that did that, he's also the one who said, well, you know what, for the record, what I'm going to do is I'm going to submit these documents for the record. And one of them was the Wilson memo. And this is Admiral Wilson, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And this is a guy that worked with Dr. Stephen Greer and a few others, pre-disclosure project, who tried to get access to these special access programs when he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and was denied. And he went to the Joint Chiefs, and they didn't know they got denied. And so he penned what's known as the Wilson memo. And the Wilson memo goes into a lot of what you're talking about, nuclear facilities being not targeted, but flown over, the nukes being shut down. And so this actually went into congressional record, which to me validates a lot of that information, because the congressman that actually formulated this was the same one that brought these documents and put them in the congressional record. And he's also one of the guys who was in the closed door sessions. He was in the other closed door sessions when this happened last time. He's read the classified reports that were released of the first UAP report that was released. And so when he's doing this, he's really telling you what's happening and where the truth really lies, other than what is being disclosed. And it's kind of like this ancillary disclosure, because this guy has this information. He's been in these classified settings, and he's sitting there going, whoa, hold on. Well, what about the Wilson memo? What about this guy's reports of them going to nuclear facilities, which brings validation to those events that they were very, very true, that they did happen, and what these people are actually talking about is very, very truthful, because he wouldn't be putting in the congressional record these accounts of these UFOs over the nuclear facilities or the Wilson memo unless he believed that they'd been truthful, and this guy is one who has access to these classified reports and these behind-the-door settings. So, for me, I saw a lot of validation. You just had to look through a lot of this.
You have to know the context, but for the average citizen who's, kind of like, what the hell's going on here? But when you think about it, I'm not going to be too negative. I'm going to say 7 years ago, this would be unheard of.
Yeah.
That this would be talked about, that this, but a lot of stuff has happened in the last 7 years. Things are accelerating. And, we talk about disclosure, and Anzar always tells me, well, it's more like revelation than disclosure, which means it has to come it has to be revealed to you from within your consciousness. And once you do that, then it will make a lot more sense. But the disclosure is kind of other directed. It's kind of like, we'll wait for the government to tell us what the truth is. Until then, we're just going to sit here, instead of taking that step and following along with it and realizing that we have to be actively involved in it. And that's part of what CIRO is doing. We have people in CIRO who have government experience, and they're like, sending briefing papers to members of Congress, and it's being taken seriously. So there is some good news, and I agree with you that if you understand where to look and you see the subtext, you don't even have to be in the classified briefing to know what's going on. The only discouraging part is there's still those who feel that that this needs to be hidden, and that we're going to try to get one over on our adversaries by blowing them up with a death ray from an invisible UFO, or something crazy like that, like Mars attacks or something.
It's unfortunate too, because I think a lot of what drives this stuff is behind the scenes actors, globalist elitists, and maybe even darker forces that operate behind them. I think that the United States, I think that the formulation of Majestic 12 originally was not to hide these secrets deep within our government, but to keep them from the government. And I think that and this is why a lot of people perish from Majestic 12, but when we start looking at it, is Eisenhower warned of the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex is really what has spawned up around these crashed UFOs, these cases of crashed UFOs in the 1940s. And I think that this is what Majestic 12 was actually doing, was making sure that these companies and corporations were owned by people who really believed in true American values, and that they gave them this technology, but it was held within very compartmentalized aspects of these contractors, to where they would always have the assurance to have government contracts. They would always be having a certain level of revenue coming in from the government, because the government wants them to reverse engineer these technologies, bring them in, implement them into their warfighter. But also, I think that that the reason they compartmentalized it into these defense contractors and not into the military is because they wanted to keep it away from the government for these exact reasons. Because the government's going to look at it as, oh man, we have a new offensive weapon. We have a new defensive weapon. Oh, we have an invisible UFO that can take out China. Oh, we rule the world. And because politics typically are refreshed every 4 to 8 years, and we always have these cyclic actions of war, as well as that, government is devoid of emotion. It's devoid of logic and rationalism sometimes. And that I think these people were really smart back in that day, and a lot of what we consider Majestic 12 was really to keep it from government. And this is one of the reasons why Eisenhower, former general, highly integrated in the intelligence agencies, came out and did what he did, really producing a war, giving this false interpretation on the military-industrial complex. Not saying that they're not horrible people, not saying that they don't develop weapons of mass destruction, because they absolutely do, and they help perpetuate the wars in this world. But I think that a lot of the breakaway civilization, a lot of the breakaway technology derives from these very, very compartmentalized subcontractors of the defense departments, of the military-industrial complex, that they have technologies beyond our imaginable, but they would never release them to humanity. There was a report before the Brookings report that came out that talked about this, that if we reverse engineer these technologies and we started to implement them into society, humanity would begin to decline. That it would happen, such a fast technological progression would actually de-evolve us over time. And I think this is one thing that we're seeing right now with cell phones. I think that this is, reverse engineered alien technology that allowed us to speed up our own development of technology, and they released it way too fast, and look what it's done to people.
Yeah, it's made us lonelier and more isolated than we've ever been, especially young people. And it's kind of horrifying. I wanted to share with you a lucid dream that I have that I think was based on a download that I got from Anzar and company. And in this lucid dream, I was on some kind of military base, and I was led to a craft, and it was very much the way you described it. It was metallic, but there was no, control surfaces. There was no cockpit. It was just like these kind of built-in things that you could kind of sit in a circle, in a round circle. And this guy, he seemed like a military officer, had like something with a handle, and he put it inside of a little device. It's a very simple looking device. He just placed it in there, and the whole thing just goes whoop, like this. It becomes, and he said, when he put it in there, he looks at me and he goes, "It's alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's alive." And all of a sudden the metal was gone, and it was like you could see through it. There's no windows, but the metal became transparent. And then we lifted off, and we were going at this tremendous speed. Well, first we were going kind of slow, but nobody could see us. We could see them, but they couldn't see us. And then we went at this tremendous speed, and we were flying around. And I got the feeling that was, I was being shown. I mean, I've been shown this before when I thought about it. I think when I was a kid, I was shown this thing too by Anzar, who's been with me for a long time. But it was so interesting to see how, to integrate that into what you were talking about, into the, whoever the operator is integrated with it. And it is alive. It's part of who you are, and you're, at a subatomic level. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. It was such a cool experience. I mean, I was a pilot in the Army. I flew helicopters, and I love flying.
Yeah.
And my wife is actually a helicopter pilot too. She wasn't in the military, but in civilian. And it was such a cool experience. And so I know this stuff. I mean, we've heard enough reports. You've read enough reports, talked to enough people. This stuff is real. And we do have it. But what are we going to do with it? And I think you're right that these entities are not necessarily trusting in the governments, because governments come and go. But the true power is something else, and these breakaway civilizations, which I'm just fascinated by that whole concept. But anyway, I wanted to share that with you. And earlier you mentioned, it made me think of the PK Man, that book by Jeffrey Mishlove. I don't know if you've ever talked to him on your show, but
no.
He just won that Bigelow Prize, like $500,000 for his consciousness beyond death consciousness studies or whatever. Basically his life's work. He's a parapsychologist. Mm-hmm. And I've been on his show a couple of times. He's a great guy. And he wrote a book called The PK Man. Now I can't remember the actual name of that guy. He's dead, but he had the ability to, kind of like what you're talking about with Richard Greer, to bring Dr. Greer to bring down UFOs, and he could actually make lightning strikes. He did all this incredible macro PK, not micro PK. Like I moved a little ball, a millimeter. No, not micro, but macro PK. And he could manifest these things. But basically, he tried to they were very interested in him at SRI. But he was too much of a loose cannon. And he didn't have the discipline. And Mishlove tells a story, Jeffrey tells a story of how he got mad at Jeffrey and caused him an illness, a severe illness.
Oh.
And then it cleared up. And then the PK Man, Ted Owens was his name. Now I remember it, Ted Owens. He called up Jeffrey and said, "I'm very sorry. You've been sick, haven't you?" And Jeffrey goes, "Yes, I've been really sick." Came on, said, he said, "I did that, and I'm very sorry. I was mad at you." So he had he had these abilities, but he didn't have all the discipline, and ultimately it destroyed him. Wow. I mean, because it was just more, than a normal human being could adapt to. And he called. There were insectoids that he worked with, these extraterrestrials. He didn't call them insectoids. He called them, I can't remember what he called them. But anyway, there's this book by Jeffrey called The PK Man. That's really, really interesting read. And Jeffrey did a 10-year study of him before the guy, Ted Owens, passed away. But there's people in history, you've done the history of the esoteric and who've done these incredible things, who have these powers, and they've been documented. A lot of them have been very well documented. And so every once in a while, somebody comes along like that who has these incredible abilities, but it's so hard to harness it and make it for good, because there's a tendency to, human frailties give you that much power, and you turn, going back to Star Wars, turn to the dark side,
Yeah.
You become a Sith Lord,
Well, Well, and that's why I think it's so critically important that we look within ourselves and we learn about ourselves and we develop that ritualistic discipline within our mind. And we have this structure of discipline and understanding the physical world before we start delving into the spiritual world, because you get what Ted Owens had there, is that you get this undisciplined mind that has this immense power, but really doesn't know how to utilize it to benefit humanity, doesn't know how to utilize it to progress humanity to the next level. And I think that those are extraordinary gifts. And I think there's people on this planet right now that have very, very similar gifts, and you would never know it, and they'll never tell you, and they'll never use them, because they know that in using those types of gifts, they start to change the public paradigm. They start to change the world, and that they sometimes don't trust, not necessarily in themselves, but in the sense of what other people will do and how other people will react. Or, then you're going to be visited by a federal agent. You're going to be arrested, taken to some detainment facility, and they're going to be like, we're studying you, and we're going to use your powers, and you're now our asset. And, it's a big fear, because we live in this very low density mentality of humanity, where it's all about power, greed, and the propagation of your own will, I guess, in a sense. So I know, I'm not going to say his name, but I know a guy, probably one of the most powerful psychics in the world. You would think, oh man, I wish I had that psychic ability, but the guy has been controlled by our government, utilized, and he can't even travel without permission. He can't go out of the country because they don't want him to fall into enemy hands, And this guy, talk about remote viewing, talk about all this stuff. I mean, he's like at Ted Owens level, but he's more controlled. But he doesn't have freedom. He doesn't have basic freedom like you and I have to talk. You can't go on a show like this. Something terrible would happen to him if he did. Or they wouldn't even allow it. I mean, at the highest level, and I know at the highest level, they've shut down whatever he's tried to do, where he tries to break out of this. And I feel sorry for the guy. I really do. Yep. And I hear a lot of people saying, man, I wish I was that psychic. And one of these psychics told me once, he said, you should be happy with what you got. You can, develop it as much as you can, but remember, you're as psychic as you need to be. And up to a certain level, you get to where it could be a liability. I mean, you could lose control of your destiny, lose control of your life, and not end up doing stuff that you want to do, and or have no freedom, basic freedom. So but anyway, those are extreme cases, but there are people like that. There is a Ted Owens type that's alive right now, and I'm sure our adversaries have people that are the same. I 100% agree. Fantastic conversation, Bruce. I absolutely love it.
Very cool,
you, man. What do you have coming up, and where can people find you?
You can find me at bruceolavsolheim.com. All my books and comic books are on Amazon. Coming up, we have this animated series, Snarc, who's half alien, half human, and there's a lot of real life stuff behind the fiction, so it's kind of fun. And so that Snarc Animations, every Saturday we drop an episode, and if you just look up Snarc, or just go to Bruce Olav Solheim, middle name OLAV, bruceolavsolheim.com, and you can find all that stuff on there. That's the easiest way to find it all.
Awesome.
So that's what's going on, and I really appreciate it, Joshua. We never know where we're going to end up or where we're going. It just goes in so many cool directions.
That's why this conversation's on the Fringe, because it's not an interview. We just have a conversation. You never know where it's going to go. So much appreciated, Bruce. Thank you so much to the audience. Guys, we're going to head to Fringe After Dark in 30 minutes from now. That's through our socialredpill.com, our social network subscription service. You can head on over there to find out more information about that. We'll see a lot of you guys in about 30 minutes. Other than that, much love, respect. God bless you guys. Please go visit Bruce at bruceolavsolheim.com. The links are in the description as well as in the chat. You guys take care, have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.